What does it mean to live a life of service without borders but with roots? In this episode of Rebooting the Brain, Dr. Sharan Srinivasan is joined by Dr. A.N. Prasad, a pediatric neurologist, epilepsy specialist, and a lifelong student of science and spirit. Dr. Prasad's yatra, his journey, is not just geographical. It spans tribal villages and global capitals, mobile hospitals and medical universities, faith traditions, and scientific frontiers. But no matter where the road has taken him, one thing has stayed constant: his deep, unwavering love for working with children. From the time of his early education for his medical degree at the University of Delhi, post-graduation and specialty training in pediatrics at PGI Chandigarh, he has pursued an academic career of teaching and research with specialty certifications and training from the Royal Colleges of Physicians of the UK, Canada in pediatrics, neurology, and child neurology. Dr. Prasad has mastered systems across continents, and yet he never lost his connection to the soul of Indian healthcare. He continues to work with families from cities and small towns alike, advocating for early childhood care, holistic development, and a cultural understanding of wellness that begins long before a diagnosis. At the heart of his work lies epilepsy, a condition often misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and steeped in stigma. Dr. Prasad dismantles these myths with clarity and compassion. Epilepsy, he explains, is not just seizures. He reminds us that a seizure is not daydreaming, that not every fainting spell is benign, that diagnosis isn't just about the event, it's about the video EEGs, clinical observation, and listening deeply to what families aren't always able to articulate. From the misuse of amulets to ward off evil spirits, to the emotional and financial burdens families silently carry, Dr. Prasad shares stories that reveal how much we still need to unlearn, and how much hope there still is through medication, lifestyle change, surgical options, and awareness. What makes Dr. Prasad's yatra remarkable is not just his knowledge, it's his balance between academia and empathy, between global exposure and local impact, between rigorous scientific inquiry and a quiet belief that healing often flows through us, not from us. This is Rebooting the Brain, and this episode is the yatra of Dr. A.N. Prasad.
ജ്ഞാനാനന്ദമയം ദേവം നിർമ്മലസ്ഫടികാകൃതിം ആധാരം സർവവിദ്യാനാം ഹയഗ്രീവം ഉപാസ്മഹേ ആധാരം സർവവിദ്യാനാം ഹയഗ്രീവ ഉപാസ്മഹേ ഹയഗ്രീവ ഉപാസ്മഹേ.
Rebooting the Brain, powered by PRS Neurosciences. Namaste. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste, everybody. My name is Dr. Sharan Srinivasan, and I am a functional neurosurgeon from Bengaluru, India. Today, we have a fantastic guest who's come all the way from Canada, other side of the world, North America, and he's Dr. Asuri Prasad. a pediatric neurologist. So, neurologist, pediatric neurologist with a special interest in epilepsy. So, he is a pediatric epileptologist. So, we welcome him to our Rebooting the Brain podcast, and we'll ask him to introduce himself. Before that, guys, remember you have to subscribe to our channel, share, press the like button, definitely the bell icon, and share this with everybody. And once you love our videos, please leave comments. It definitely helps. You never know who's the next person, who's the next patient who needs to be helped by us. So, Dr. Prasad, welcome to our show. It's fantastic for you to be here. So, if you tell our audience a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Thank you, Sharan, for this wonderful opportunity to just have a freewheeling discussion
Absolutely.
about the many things of life that we've talked about. And I think I would like to start off before saying anything else with a mantram of my own, which was given to me by someone who witnessed my own yatra. To put it in context. So this is a Hanuman. We pray to God Hanuman in this mantra. It goes like this. Tomasmin karya niryoge pramanam harisattamam Hanuman yatnamasthaya dukkakshaya karo bhava. We pray for Lord Hanuman, who's the devoted servant of Sri Rama, who carries out all of his commands. And we pray to him because he is the embodiment of strength. And we pray to him to give us the strength to deal with all of the difficulties, sorrows of life. So that is the meaning of this mantra.
Amazing.
My name is Asuri Narayan Prasad, and I am a pediatric neurologist, an epileptologist, and an academic. I hold an academic title of now of Professor Emeritus at the University of Western Ontario, also known as Western University, in London, based in London, Ontario. And
Toronto Western is called, no? Is that no? That's different.
That's different.
Okay, sorry.
This is in London, Ontario. Okay. London is a university town about 140 kilometers southwest of Toronto.
Okay, got it.
So I'm happy to talk about my life's journey.
Absolutely. And as your poster says, it's a yatra. I think between us and our patients and their families, it's a journey of a lifetime each of us have. We would love to hear what you have gone through. But I want to set the context of this whole thing. You spoke about, rural India, the Naxalite infested area, Bastar, something that happened there. You had a journey there. Can you tell our audience what is a Canadian, trained, settled pediatric neurologist, epileptologist doing I have not gone there. What did you get to do there? Can you tell our audience what's going on?
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying that I am a Bharatiya at heart.
Fantastic.
Even though I hold Canada, which has given me a home for the last 3 decades or more, in high regard, it's also part of this Bhudevi.
Correct.
So wherever I step on the soil, I'm never removed far away from from Bharat Desham.
That's true.
So the context that or the experience that you spoke about takes me back to more than about 10 years back or so, where I was volunteering.
2013-14 roughly?
Maybe a little earlier, 2010-11 or so. I was volunteering for a very unusual program of providing healthcare to rural communities in very remote areas.
Of India.
Of India. This was done through an NGO called Lifeline Express. And the person who actually I worked with is a neurologist at All India Institute of Medical Sciences.
I see.
She kind of recruited me into this volunteering for this effort. And the purpose of the NGO was that it was a mobile hospital based in a train. So the train would go from place to place, station itself in a remote area. And then teams of physicians, surgeons
Whoa.
would come, and it had the train housed an operating theater.
Whoa.
It had space to run clinics,
Okay.
and what would happen is that
Literally a hospital on wheels.
a hospital on wheels,
Okay.
and that too a hospital on wheels, which was on a perpetual journey. So it
Interesting.
so happened that the first clinic that I did
Mm-hmm.
was based in a little town called Jagdalpur, which
Okay.
is in Chhattisgarh.
Okay.
It's also part of the Bastar district,
Correct.
where there are obviously a lot of challenges
Yes.
for these rural communities, and it's very remote.
True.
So the journey actually began by flying from Delhi to Visakhapatnam,
Okay.
and from Visakhapatnam we drove by road
Okay.
to Jagdalpur.
Okay.
This was my first journey through parts of India that I had never even thought about.
I mean, I have also not been there at all.
It was fascinating to see that these were communities untouched by urbanization. And
Dense forest, no?
forest, obviously a very rich, the soil very rich in minerals.
Correct. Correct.
And so one could see the lush greenery around.
Mhm.
But it was also scary because every few 50 kilometers or so we would come to a barrier, and then there would be a
The
security
security.
person,
Got it.
and it brought home to me the challenges that would be posed in delivering care in these areas. And of course, fortunately, we were let through each time because we were a team of physicians.
You didn't get scared? I mean, think what's going to happen? Somebody puts a bomb
Yeah,
under
we
you.
were told not to make it before it got dark.
Dark.
So we had planned the journey in that way,
Okay.
so that we could arrive in Jagdalpur.
And you
at
to have some permits and all of those things.
No, that was not at that
not.
time. It was not
Okay.
necessary. I mean, I was an overseas citizen of India, so
No.
wasn't.
The permit to go in that area, did you have your name have to be given for security clearance?
I think
or
it was
anything?
part of
that
the
whole
team.
thing. Yeah. Got
So I think they had some kind of pre-discussions with the
Correct.
district
Correct.
authorities. So yes. So here's where I had this most extraordinary experience of that brought home to me the whole meaning of the meaning of the entire journey of my life that I had undertaken as a professional.
What do you mean by that? I mean, how does this connect to that?
So what happened was that we were running a clinic, of course,
Correct.
and then this Dr. Mamta Bhushan Singh, who was sitting across, said, "Dr. Prasad, I want you to see this child." This was a child who was about 8, 9 years old, and she had been suffering from epileptic seizures, which involved one half of her body. So one half of her body.
Okay.
Mostly it was expressing itself as a rhythmic movement in her hand.
Okay.
And this had been going on for more than 2 or 3 years. And every day, continuously, no matter what medication the family tried, they were not able to stop these seizures.
That means she's out of school, just sitting at home.
This was obviously took a toll on both the child, her quality of life, the family's quality of life, and they were running from pillar to post with different investigations and treatments, and she was on multiple medications without any benefit. So I took one look at the child, and sometimes this is the miracle of experience, that you can actually put 2 and 2 together very quickly. And once I heard the history, the gestalt itself, the whole impression led to an immediate diagnosis of what I call a condition which is named after a neurosurgeon.
Neurosurgeon?
Yes,
Theodore
Rasmussen.
Okay. I didn't know Rasmussen was a neurosurgeon. Interesting.
Rasmussen's encephalitis, as it is called.
Correct.
This was the diagnosis that I gave, and also it immediately led to the possibility that this was an epilepsy that could have a potential cure.
Mhm.
which is somewhat unusual, or at least I could immediately see that we could make a significant impact on the quality of life
Of
of
the
this
child.
child. So Dr. Singh took this case, and she requested the family to come to All India Institute.
Mhm.
And of course, they planned a specific form of surgery which involves disconnecting the affected hemisphere that's
The
generating the.
epilepsy surgery that we speak of.
Yeah,
we'll obviously speak a little bit about that
about
for
that.
sure. Yeah.
So, and fortunately, for a couple of years later after this event, I had gone to Jagdalpur
Gone
again.
back. You
And
had the
this child was
courage.
brought to me by a grateful family who showed how well she had done post
Amazing.
surgery.
Amazing.
Her seizures had stopped. She was
Oof.
attending school. She had a
Fantastic.
mild residual, little neurological deficit. Um, but the effect, of course, was truly dramatic.
I can imagine.
And in this sort of dramatic event, I could see the result of all that I had possibly trained for. It was so gratifying to see
It's like
that
a nasha.
one could make a difference in a
Correct.
child's life,
Amazing.
and
That too remote.
yeah, in
Yeah.
such a remote
Yeah.
area. So many things happen for a reason, as
Yeah,
they
I
say,
know. I think so.
and so it was just more than serendipity
Very
that
true.
that such a thing could happen.
Very true.
So to add to
That
this,
summarizes the whole, what you got out to do in your life is just
right.
amazing. Just amazing.
So therein, of course, the experience of the clinic was had a great impact on me, um, because I realized that epilepsy care is so difficult to access in all of these remote communities. It brought home to me the challenges that families face in seeking epilepsy care for their children. And of course, in our remote rural communities, there is also the social stigma that goes with this condition.
Not rural, Dr. Prasad, even in urban, even in a city like Bengaluru, people are, some of the families, when the moment mention the word epilepsy, the whole face changes.
Yeah, it's
It's very
it's
sad.
striking, the social stigma, particularly in our communities. It carries a lifelong
Why is
impact.
that? Is there any history to this? The stigma, by any chance?
Well, epilepsy has, in almost all communities across the world, has been regarded as one of possession.
Really?
Yes, by evil spirits. This has been a
Oh.
uniform theme that has run
Because they don't know
through.
what the hell was going on, probably.
If you look at the Western side of things, it has been known as the falling sickness in Latin or Greek or one.
Oh, because they fall down.
Exactly. And there is even a patron saint for epilepsy,
Hmm.
Saint Valentine, whose name is associated with
Oh,
the
I didn't know this.
Valentine's Day.
Oh, really? I didn't know this connection with
Yeah,
epilepsy.
there's a fascinating connection if you allow me to elaborate
Sure,
on
why
this.
not? Of course,
So,
I didn't know our audience will definitely want to know.
one of my friends in Germany actually has done a study of the depiction of epilepsy in in the Christian sort of context of in churches and this thing
Mhm.
uh, in um, in paintings and in depictions of Saint
Mhm.
Valentine, particularly as one who is the patron saint who can actually help individuals with epilepsy. There is a painting of Raphael hanging somewhere in Rome, where there is a child who actually one of the figures in that painting is in the position of a child who is having a supplementary motor area seizure. So
Amazing.
so these
So
depictions,
these are all very old, I
yeah,
suppose.
and a German friend pointed out that I was showing him our great Nataraja,
Correct.
the dancing
Correct.
Nataraja, and under his feet is a depiction of a what might be called as a demon or
Correct.
rakshasa,
Correct.
or who's called apasmara.
Correct.
Apasmara is also a form of epilepsy in Ayurvedic
Really?
medicine. Yes. And
My goodness.
so apasmara is really
I didn't know this.
forgetfulness, a kind of forgetfulness that comes upon a patient. So even our great Shiva, Lord
Interesting.
Bhagavan, is in his Nataraja form destroys this
Amazing.
this
Amazing.
apasmara. So we have depictions
Correct.
of across the human experience
True.
of in many ways this problem of epilepsy. And so coming back, recircling back to the clinic, I found that the child had been branded, had an amulet around its neck,
Whoa.
and well, a spiritual doctor or someone who had pronounced a kind of this thing to ward off the evil
Mm-hmm.
spirits. And of course, one hears many stories of individuals being punished in ways because they are possessed. So the social stigma is very profound, and that's something that has has to be addressed.
True. Honestly, if you look back, you can't blame them too much because they've come and sought help. They've taken medications, not that but it wasn't completed. It wasn't saying that, it is a drug resistant epilepsy, something more has to be done. That's where experts like you, as pediatric epileptologists or epileptologists in specific, who's focusing on the epilepsy, which we will talk later for sure,
For sure.
will can contribute. It's not the end of the road as
Right.
what you're trying to say.
Right.
It's a fantastic start to let our audience know that
Right.
there is hope,
Right.
in this whole journey of
Yeah,
epilepsy treatment.
I'm seeing behind you your book,
Yes,
which also carries the title of the journey
correct.
and of hope. So both
Yes.
of our minds seem to be on the same
Yes, yes,
page.
because see, like I tell my patients that when they say, "Sir, you're God, you saved us," and things like, I said, "I'm not a God. Please don't even have any mistake of that. We are a human being with a skill. God has given us this to help somebody get better. And
Yeah.
if I was God, I should be able to save everybody, which is not the truth. And then I'm quite sure you agree with me that I tell them, the more I see the suffering, the more I see there's an energy beyond us, which eventually determines the outcome. We call it energy, fate, destiny, God, whatever you call it. There's an energy beyond us which determines what is happening.
Yeah.
And I think we do the best we can with the right focus, and eventually everything.
I would entirely agree with you by saying that we are just merely the tools of the divine
Absolutely.
intelligence that permeates all of
Absolutely.
all of creation, and this intelligence is what guides us in doing what we do. It is the motivation for what
Yes.
we do with our lives,
Yes.
and eventually it's the motivation through which outcomes are
True.
determined.
True.
And we are just the vehicles through which
Absolutely.
these
Absolutely.
things happen.
True. True.
So yes, I am totally in
Fantastic.
agreement with your
So I'm going to ask you a natural next question coming to my mind. You are a person who studied MBBS here when seeking, the pastures of the Western world at that time, because you felt that was for some reason. And it's like a full circle coming back to serve rural India in a underserved area. Was this an accident, or was this actually something that was in the back of your mind, which sought you to connect to this place? Can you tell our viewers if something like that exists?
yeah. It's a very profound question, and it may take some time for me
No
to cover
problem. No
this
problem. No
this
problem.
part of my yatra.
Yes.
So you know, I come from a very simple family. My roots are mostly sort of Andhra, and my father and mother. But before that, I think I have to say that I was born in Bangalore.
Oh, you oh,
Yeah.
really?
I was
Oh,
born in Bangalore at the
somehow
municipal.
a very interesting connection.
Yeah. So I can't take the Bangalore out of me. The Bengaluru that I was born in, I was in a civil hospital in
see.
Vishweshwaram Circle.
Oh my God.
And my childhood, at least the first few years of my childhood, I just kind of have fragments of memory
Mhm.
kindled by. We used to live in a small home on Kankanhalli Road,
Okay.
and my grandfather used to live with us, and he was a major influence in my life.
Okay.
His name was Asuri Srinivas Charlu,
Okay.
and he had very little formal education, maybe just about a high school education, but he was a remarkable brain, I would say. He was a polyglot, spoke more than 7-8 languages, had
Whoa.
taught himself Hindi, including the ability to read and write, Urdu, Persian.
Amazing.
And in addition to that, he would do mathematics in his spare time. He'd sit and do calculus.
Really?
Yes, and
Did you ask
it
him
was.
why?
I have to say that he just enjoyed the intellectual exploration of mathematics, and
Interesting.
it's very interesting that, and I'll come to it later.
Sure.
But he was also a Sanskritam scholar,
Okay.
and he used to give extempore lectures on the Bhagavad Gita in the glass house in Lalbagh
Lal Bagh.
to a group of people.
Mhm.
So he had a profound influence while I was growing up. He used to read the Valmiki Ramayanam every year
During the
during around Ramanavami.
no.
And I would sit with him, and he would go tell me the stories in the Ramayana. And today, when I hear Dushyant Sridhar talk about the Ramayana, so many of those
I'm hoping
stories.
one day I'll get him on the podcast.
You should
Talk about
should.
spirituality and neuroscience. I've already reached out to him.
You
Let's hope it
should. You
works.
should. I'm sure he'll be delighted.
Yeah.
He's certainly someone who has brought a modern contemporary
Absolutely.
context
I'm
to.
also a great follower of his. I love the guy.
And so anyway, so that was so my grandfather was played a seminal contribution in my early childhood. My father, Asuri Bhashyam, was an accountant and cost accountant, and he started his life on the railway mail service as a sorter. So it was not a great um, position in terms of a career, but he struggled, and he eventually, with a family responsibility, completed his cost accountancy, and eventually went to Tanzania as an advisor to the National Price Commission. So as an expatriate, he worked and advised them for spent about 15 years in Dar es Salaam,
Long time.
Tanzania.
Dar es Salaam.
Yeah, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. My mother, Shamanta Kamani, you are related to her, as you know, is a musician, Carnatic musician, and she has been a lifelong devotee of the Satya Sai Baba and his movement. And my grandmother was also one of the early devotees. So she has infused in me a deep love for Carnatic music. And
So do you sing also?
No, I enjoy I am a what we call
Listener.
I'm a listener. I can recognize some ragas, and I know the basic elements that are taught, because all these children who used to come home would do the exercises, building the basics of Carnatic music. So I'm familiar with some of those steps, but I obviously didn't find the time to learn music. But I would have, perhaps in my next rebirth, I might want to do that. So those were my beginnings, so humble beginnings, and the only thing I learned about myself perhaps was that I had some modicum of intelligence, which helped me do well in my academic studies at school. And with my grandfather's help and my father's encouragement, I sort of realized that working hard, which was a quality that I saw in my father, and was yielded results. So I did apply myself. And of course, my father was in a transferable position. So we moved from one place to another.
All over the country?
All over the country. So by the time I finished high school, we had moved from Bangalore to Aligarh, where I did my schooling up to class 5, I think. Class 5, yes. From kindergarten, I was in a school called Our Lady of Fatima Convent School. I remember the the nuns were very kind, as they were not very harsh on the children. So the fragmentary memories of those days. And then we moved to Mumbai, where I went to school at St. John the Baptist High School in Thane. There, the school was very different. It was run by Portuguese fathers, brothers.
Interesting.
They were more disciplinarians, and they used to go around with a cane that used to make a
Whoa.
wish as a noise. And if you're unlucky enough to be stationed out of the classroom, then you could get some corporal punishment in those days. Yeah, of course, those things wouldn't happen today, but it was a different time. Then we came.
I think some discipline has to see, either you get disciplined with the teacher or life disciplines you. At the end of the day,
I think there is that. There is
like
some.
in Hindi they say "Vaat lagaya," they say.
Yeah, there seems to be some place in between where the dictum of spare the rod and spoil the child.
I think so.
May be an extreme step. Nevertheless, I think
Somewhere
too much
in between.
freedom.
Yes,
Too
I
much
think
freedom
so.
and lack of discipline produces a whole generation of people
See,
who lack direction.
so I think, and as a child, if you don't do this, for example, think about it. As a doctor, if as a surgeon, neurosurgeon, I say I do a bad job in my surgery just because I have this attitude problem. It doesn't work. See, because there's no question of being excellence, and excellence only comes with learning from our mistakes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that developmentally, you see, the child's brain is processing a lot of information.
Correct.
And for it to develop in the right direction, some form of orientation, the development of attention
True.
is very critical for
And the decision making, right or wrong,
executive
good and
function.
bad. Yeah.
So discrimination, attention, these are important traits to develop. And they come from an early recognition of building that. And actually, you could even say that it requires some form of yogic from yoga
Really?
as a way of developing attention. An early introduction to yoga, our own ancient practices,
Correct.
might be a wonderful way
True, many places are now adding yoga to schools right now too.
So yoga is beyond just the set of
Asanas.
physical
Correct.
asanas. It's
That I
about
agree.
bringing the mind to focus
True,
on,
true.
and the West has borrowed these concepts and sort of appropriated them and labeled them as mindfulness.
Correct.
So dhyanam.
Repackaging them.
Yeah.
It's like the classical example I give here is we have a 5-star hotel near our house, and some international guy had gone there for breakfast.
Right.
And he ordered rice cakes and coconut sauce. And guess what he got? He got idli chutney and then
steamed rice cakes and coconut
sauce. It's like that. So that's the way it goes, but we have to live with that.
So coming back to this early part of childhood. So after Thane, my father realized that perhaps we were moving quite often, and it was a struggle to get positions in different schools. So he transferred me to Kendriya Vidyalaya, the central schools, which was a wonderful step because I got a more generic education, and it was a quality education. Surprisingly, we then moved from Bangalore. I was a student at KV Malleshwaram 18th Cross School.
Oh, okay.
Not too far away.
Not too far away.
So I spent about, I think, a year and few months, after which my parents were transferred again. My father was transferred again to Faridabad, where I then stayed until I graduated from high school.
Okay.
I topped the school in the All India Higher Secondary Examination.
Fantastic.
The first rank. And I had done the science stream. But we are also fortunate to have learned Sanskritam till about grade 8. And of course, with a little bit of help at home, I've stayed in touch with the language. So when I finished high school, the avenues of what should I do were laid out to me. But as the Robert Frost poem goes, the road less traveled.
Correct.
So what I did was that I had the opportunity. I had an incident in my life which I recall when I fell ill with a bout of whooping cough.
Oh.
At that time, the diagnosis again as was delayed because I had this persistent cough that went on for several weeks to months, and it was very disabling, and I couldn't go to school.
Interesting.
And it so happened that my there was a so I had to go to Delhi to see some doctors, and one person who played a very critical role in that was Professor B.R. Sheshachar.
Okay.
You
Yes,
probably
yes, yes.
are
Related.
also
Yes,
related.
yes, yes.
You're in that family. So Professor Sheshachar was the head of the Department of Zoology,
Correct.
and he was also the warden dean of the postgraduate men's hostel in Delhi University.
Interesting.
It was so he had many contacts, obviously, and so I stayed at his home for some time, and he had a wonderful library of all the latest scientific journals and books,
Interesting.
and since he kind of introduced me to a few books, which I was very obviously a voracious reader at the time, and I got interested in biology, and um, and the biological sciences held a fascination for me, which to this date I have I can't get it out of my system.
I can see that. I can see that in your
So,
eyes.
so those were the foundations, the seeking of knowledge, which seems to come to particularly our inheritance. Through our inheritance, we are belong to a community that is traditionally known as scholars,
Correct, correct.
academicians, and so this thirst for knowledge seems to be the motivating
But
factor.
I think that should be there for everybody because I had a teacher in medical school, Dr. Narayan Rao. He used to always say, You're a student of this subject all your life. The day you stop learning, you die.
Absolutely.
So I think I can clearly see that message that you're giving. And at your age, I can still see the twinkle in your eyes when you're talking about learning, which means that learning is eternal. And the more
It
you know, the
is.
more you know you don't know.
It
And,
is.
that's
It
what
is
Sikh
what
says.
that keeps us alive in many
Absolutely.
ways,
Absolutely.
and so it was in the biological sciences. So I was inspired to appear for the National Science Talent Scholarship, and there was another person who inculcated in me the spirit of scientific inquiry.
Who was that?
And there was a distant relative of ours, Mr. Srinath. Um, he was uh, he was a scientist with the CFTRI,
Okay.
and
Mysore.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and he was. I think at one point he became the director, probably.
Oh.
But I was in my high school at the time, and he was very kind to take me on as an understudy for
Oh.
a scientific project, which I actually began to really understand what it means to have a scientific hypothesis,
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing.
develop
Really?
methodology. Yes,
Shit.
and this
In high
scientific
school.
in high school,
How cool is that?
and this is in 1974.
Whoa, whoa.
So
You were, I mean, I think you are a destiny child, looks like, because you got introduced to all these things so early because these are foundational
yes,
things for us to really think.
absolutely, and of course in my school, one of the things that my father was very keen on, and a couple of other people had played. We used to get these science magazines called Science Today and
Correct.
Science Reporter,
Yes.
and we used to subscribe to those,
Mm-hmm.
and I would eagerly wait each month.
See what's new going
Yeah,
on.
and it was a time when the idea of genes and how the role that they played in cellular regulation was being explored. We were talking about bacterial replication,
Mm-hmm.
transformation, and there was a Nobel Prize given for something called as an operon concept
Mm-hmm.
by proposed by it was given to Jacob and Monod, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
It's of course going back in time, but anyway, the point was that I was fascinated by how these controlling elements regulated the life of a cell.
Mm-hmm.
And
then the human being and the human body, the human being itself.
Exactly, and I will come to it later.
Of course,
how these things play a role in your life.
Absolutely.
As you go along. So this were the sort of humble beginnings.
Unbelievable.
So
I can't imagine that, all this has been, the seeds were sown so early in your life.
And again, I think I was so immersed in not only biological sciences but physical sciences as well, in physics and chemistry and mathematics. And I really did very well with distinctions in all the subjects. In those days, we had to write long answers.
I know.
There were no MCQs, so there wasn't an opportunity to score very high. But there was this thing that was a yardstick of your achievement, which was called a distinction.
Correct.
So I scored a distinction in all the subjects: mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology.
Fantastic.
And in those days, it was fashionable for everyone to take the IIT examination. But everybody was going to be an engineer. We had a lot of engineers in our family.
Absolutely, of course.
And so I went up all the way to the interview board and
of IIT.
IIT Delhi. I remember my father sitting with me. A number was going to be called, and somewhere along the line, I told my father, I want to be a doctor.
Are you serious? In the queue you're sitting?
In the queue.
Oh,
and
that is...
my father,
what?
and in his own, I have to say that his amazing ability to give me the freedom to choose. He said, this is a chance of a lifetime. You're going to join a prestigious program of engineering, which everybody aspires to.
Absolutely.
To this day, I think people would love to give their...
Absolutely.
And you're going to give it up for some uncertainty in your life because you have to do pre-medical, and then you have to take exams, and
it's a never-ending
process. But I said, no, I'm determined that I have to become a physician, doctor. There were a couple of reasons, looking back in hindsight, that we can talk about. One was that my natural instinct was to pursue a career in science.
Correct.
But I knew that financially it was not a very rewarding one.
So it's the money or the lack of it that was at the back of
your mind? Because I came from very modest beginnings in our life. We always lived with a sense of, although there was always food on the table and clothes to wear, we were not that indigent. But we were... there was this
scarcity of money.
I can imagine. So I told myself, but at least if I become a physician, I'll always have the capacity to earn throughout my life.
Correct.
And there's no question of, even today people, they don't need to retire. You can always practice your skill, right? True. So I decided that that's what I was going to do. And so that led me to...
you gave up what looked lucrative, which is what you wanted, but to an uncertainty, like your dad said.
Yeah. So the ability to perhaps have some level of measure of confidence in my own abilities, and the hope that I could actually eventually become a doctor was what drove me. And I did a year of pre-medical in Delhi University in Hindu College. I was very lucky to...
So you walked out of that interview?
I walked out of the interview.
Those guys must have thought you were nuts.
Well,
did anybody stop you, or somebody asked you?
Some other lucky guy got the seat.
I hope that guy is listening to you and saying, I must be the guy who got it in. Amazing. This is how destiny plays role for him and for you and everything else.
Yes, I think our paths are decided from some elsewhere. It's
absolutely, there's
and
no
I think
question.
that whatever gave me that motivation at that moment played a critical role in shaping.
Imagine you're in the queue to get a seat. Chalo, you had thought about it a few months ago.
It was... you would say that proverbially, a bird in hand is worth two in the bush, right?
Yes.
But it requires a certain amount of self-confidence and gumption to actually think that you can give this up and actually pursue that.
Amazing.
So there I was. So I went through all the examinations, and then I was selected for, I got a seat in Maulana Azad Medical College, Delhi University.
Maulana Azad, okay.
Where I completed my MBBS. So those years were wonderful years. I lived in the hostel, and while my parents were away in Dar es Salaam, and I managed to stay on course. There were obviously,
So you were in a hostel at that time.
yeah.
Mm.
This was in Bahadur Shah Zafar Marg in Delhi. There was a boys' hostel where I stayed for 4 years. In fact, our what is it called? Golden Jubilee reunion is taking place next month with
Oh,
our batch. So I have agreed to have
you're coming back
also
again.
coming back again.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
to attend that reunion.
Very
So
nice.
it's yeah. So after completing my medical school and internship in Maulana Azad, I decided that there were opportunities to
Mhm.
either train go for what was called as a house job for a year before
Yeah,
you could do an
yeah.
MD
Senior house job thing.
yeah, and before you could apply for an MD, a 2-year MD program as a specialization. But I was very serendipitous that I had applied for uh, the examination in Postgraduate Institute in Chandigarh and in All India Institute. I got a call for the interview. And as luck would have it, I was somewhere out of 50 or 60 candidates that were selected. I was somewhere like 24 or so. And see how luck plays a role. So I wanted to do internal medicine. And of course, by the time roll number 20 came along, all of the internal medicine general
Seats were
surgery
taken.
seats were taken.
Ah,
So when
hot
my turn,
seats.
yeah, and then when my turn came along, the pediatric seats were also taken.
Oh,
But I was given a wait list of number 1 for pediatrics. So
okay.
I came disappointed. I came back. And on the 4th of January, I come back from the hostel, come back to the hostel, and someone says, "There's a telegram waiting for you. Where were you?" So
Telegram. I
yes.
don't think the current generation know what the hell a telegram is. And at that time, it used to be the standard of care, the standard of communication. So telegram, you have to understand how in one lifetime we have had a transformational change from writing inland letters and cards and telegrams to communicate to the WhatsApps that's here and the instantaneous. I think
Yes.
that's what has got the current generation addicted to instant gratification. I think they want everything right now, right here, which is not true. It's
Yeah.
such a journey of getting things
So,
done.
so see how fate plays a strange role. So the telegram had a very brief and terse message. You've got a position, come and join tomorrow. Otherwise, you'll forfeit your position to be given to someone else. So this was sometime in the afternoon. I caught the overnight bus I just left everything, just caught an overnight bus to Chandigarh. And of course, my very good friend had already secured a position in the general surgery program, and we laugh about it when we talk about our life in Chandigarh. And I went and presented myself, and the rest was history. I got into the training program in pediatrics, which was a formative one. It was a formative experience where I really learned deep within how much I love children and working with children, and it gave me a sense of purpose to see how I could help, parents and children.
So now I can see the connection of you going back to Bastar and everything else, the children.
Yeah, that was probably the sort of recurrent theme of my whole professional life. So here I was, so I did a 3-year program in pediatrics. It did involve an additional examination at the end of the first year, and which was again another competitive one in
Really?
those days. In those days, the program was split. You had to do 1 year of house job or first year residency, and then you would be you had to go through a general competition to find a spot for the MD program.
In spite of you having been
In
selected
spite
for.
of being selected, and
Whoa.
there was an internal competition as well as competition from people from outside.
My goodness.
And
So you were not guaranteed that you were still.
not guaranteed. It
My
required.
goodness.
It required.
Did you know that when you got in actually, or
No, I did not.
you didn't know?
There was
Oh.
still uncertainty. Still uncertainty, but I think it was one of the really competitive exams. But I did get my seat.
I can imagine.
And it was a moment of that I did savor very much of success, which it seemed like it was a culmination of all my hopes that I could continue in the
True.
program and finish up with an MD in pediatrics. And at that time, this is again, I think, something you might want to talk about. Um, Neonatology and neonatal care was an emerging field.
So neonatology is children from just born to 1 month.
Yeah, the first month of life is the
First month of life,
neonatal.
first month of
Yeah.
life. Before everybody was being taken care of by the pediatrics, and then they realized that these children needed a special care. I
Yeah,
think,
so
especially
the so
premature.
the national statistics on infant mortality rate was very high, 140 per thousand.
I remember that,
Yeah.
and most of them were within this 1 month. I think.
The significant amount
Yeah,
of mortality and morbidity resulted in from illnesses in the first month of
correct.
life for these babies, and particularly those infants who were born out of pregnancies, recurrent pregnancies, who had poor prenatal
Mm.
care. That impacted
The
children.
antenatal care, I think, was far
Was
suboptimal. Yeah.
yes. I mean the for we did have some programs. There was an integrated child health scheme that was coming in play there, and there was an attempt to improve prenatal care in rural areas, and then deliveries by
Mhm.
trained eyes and so on. So those were all efforts that were being made, but clearly, our population and its needs far outstripped any
True.
kind of resources that were available. And so I had some interest in neonatology. So some of my mentors had trained abroad
Hmm.
because it was a developing field,
Mhm.
and that was one of the impetus. I mean, it was an impetus for me to see perhaps that I could train and acquire more skills in the field and then come back to India. And at that time when I finished, there were options to go into practice, but
Mhm.
somehow I I was interested in academics, and I felt that I wanted an academic career in medicine.
Okay.
And of course, there was a motivation to be eventually called as a professor.
Ah.
You know,
Oh, is there a story behind that?
title. Yes, I mean in the sense that all through my medical school,
Mm-hmm.
we had our very very highly experienced physicians who had all to some extent had spent their lives, had gone abroad, had become had acquired these fancy British
Titles.
degrees,
Uh,
triple MRCP,
correct,
and
correct.
and they used to go. So I always used to think it would be wonderful to sort of, and they would come and with their white coats and
Mhm.
the stethoscopes, and and then a retinue of followers would go
That's right.
behind them on the rounds. I thought that was
It's cool. Yeah.
quite a thing to aspire
Yeah.
to, and they were all professors and so on. So I told myself that maybe I should have an academic career where I can become a professor eventually.
Fantastic.
So there I was. So at the end of my when I got my MD degree in pediatrics, um, some people said you can certainly try going to the United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So I pestered my father and made my way to the UK, passed the requirements of the examination, did my several years, about 5 years in the UK.
Oh, you were 5 years in the UK.
Yeah, I did. I worked as a senior house officer, then I worked as a registrar. But I found at that time when I finished I got my MRCP in pediatrics in about 18 months, and I did find that it was difficult to make your way in the British system. In those days, there was a bottleneck, and of course we
I think
were
for outsiders,
for
I think they
outsiders.
had
Yeah.
somehow a very
Yeah.
unwritten different plan. That's what a lot of
Well,
people.
there's obviously what may be recognized as a Bhumiputra policy,
Correct.
so if I may
So everybody should understand that every country directly,
has
indirectly has these
yes,
things,
I
and it's
mean
not unique to our
yeah,
country.
it's not unique. So
Uh,
I think that people who are born and growing up and original inhabitants of a nation
true.
have first right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see anything wrong in that at all.
Yeah, I think that that's entirely appropriate. So at that time, a very seminal event in my life kind of changed the direction of my
Oh, what happened then?
whereupon I had thought about coming back to India. My father passed away suddenly. He had a stroke.
Oh my
He had a
goodness.
stroke, and he passed away quite unexpectedly.
You were in
That
UK at that time.
I was in the United Kingdom, and he passed away in Dar es Salaam.
Oh,
And
he was
so
in
that,
Dar es Salaam at that
yeah,
time.
so that changed a lot of personal factors in my life. That did hit me hard. And soon after that, I got an opportunity to go to Canada to practice as a pediatrician in a small community in Newfoundland. We were in Newfoundland. This is a small community, about maybe 15,000 people at the most. And this is where I started my life in North America.
Interesting. But you went as a pediatrician
As a
there.
pediatrician. So for about 2 years, I worked as a pediatrician.
Okay.
And then I explored ways of joining the
You
mainstream.
didn't do anything about neonatology in the UK.
I did. I
You did,
did.
okay.
Most of the work that I did
was neonatology.
was
But
to,
still you went in as a
acquire a
pediatrician.
lot of skills in
Got
neonatology.
it.
But in those days, there was no specific
The distinction didn't
degree
exist.
of qualifications. You just trained, and
Okay.
you brought that skill set and experience. So when I went, and of
Even
course,
in the West, it was not clear, distinction.
there wasn't a specific.
Got
People did sometimes additional training or fellowships
Yeah.
in that field, and then were recognized as. It's only much more recent that
did the
you.
NICUs exist at that time? The
Oh yes,
NICUs?
they did. They did. They were reasonably well established in the, but we were still looking at a lot of morbidity of prematurities, even in graduating from those NICUs, because we did not have adequate treatments for respiratory distress syndrome, and so the extreme preemies would survival rates were below 28 weeks gestation were very relatively low, and the ones even between 28 to 32 weeks they had more than 50% would have had
Mortality.
significant morbidity.
Morbidity.
Yeah. So neurological sequelae that we can talk about. So when I went, I did my training in pediatrics and was practicing as a pediatrician. I got a chance to re-enter training from the North American context because, again, they did not recognize training outside.
Really? Even the UK training they didn't recognize, huh?
They gave me 50% of credit for my UK training.
I still have never understood this. What does that mean? Is it just a match fixing or why? I've not understood this at all.
There's some very painful
I don't know.
discrimination. So which I learned later on in hindsight. It made me realize that our backgrounds, for lack of a better this thing, can be discriminated against. So as a pediatrician,
Imagine with all
I had
the pedigree stuff
had
you
what was
had.
called the Class 2 license, for which I was paid less for the same work, which someone from a Class 1 country, which is if you were trained in Australia, South Africa, or America or Canada, and you came to practice in the United Kingdom.
Kind of reservation.
Sorry, in Canada.
Whatever you call it.
Yeah, so you had a Class 1 or a Class 2 or a Class 3 license. So
there's 3 also.
Yeah,
Class 3 also.
Yeah. So we were Commonwealth, we were Class 3 license. That was the reality that we had to live with. There was no.
The world should know that these realities existed as recently as your own life.
Yes.
It's not someday, sometime in the past.
Not at all.
Exactly.
And we were required to fulfill the requirements of the national college to be certified as a specialist. So there was training period requirements. Then you had to take the examination. So a considerable amount of my time for 10 years was spent in training and getting all the certification examinations.
But look at the neurology, the epilepsy.
Yeah.
How did that shift happen? Because you had such a long period in pediatrics, and suddenly how did you get interested in epilepsy?
One of my
because we want people to know, because epilepsy is such a Scrooge right now, and people need to know.
So when I was practicing as a pediatrician, I had opportunity to see many cases and diagnose them, and I had contact with a neurologist in the main children's hospital in Newfoundland. And when I went and finished my pediatric training and got the Royal College certification there, he was instrumental in saying you're a smart, you have the right what it takes to be a good neurologist,
Mhm.
because I had made diagnoses
Oh,
that I
okay,
had
okay.
sent across. So he said, well, you should think about neurology. And again, a whole lot of serendipitous events, an opening position opened up for me to train in adult neurology, which was
Okay.
one of the requirements for a
Amazing.
year. Then another story about how I landed up fulfilling the requirements by getting a position in Boston at it used to be called the Floating Hospital,
Okay.
New England
Why?
Medical Center,
It's floating on water
because
or
it was in the early 1900s. You see, it was thought that there was a polio epidemic,
what? Mm-hmm.
and these children were kept in iron lungs,
Mm-hmm.
and they were also treated away in the harbor on a boat, on a ship,
Oh,
so that they
fantastic.
got fresh air, and
Mm-hmm.
the industrial pollutants and all that did not affect their health. So the hospital was a floating one. So, like a Lifeline Express as a hospital and a train, it looks like my associations have been always
Crazy.
take me back
I know. So you have an
to
apt.
yatra.
Crazy.
So
It's
so I
amazing.
landed up doing my pediatric neurology training requirements at the floating hospital,
Okay.
and in Boston. And then when I finished with that, I got my American board certification. Then I got my Royal College certification in neurology as well as pediatrics.
Okay.
And then the final barriers to my getting a full license were
Oh,
removed.
okay.
And so then I was on par with Canadian graduates
And
and so
so
on.
you were on par.
So at that whole journey took about 5 to 7 years to complete.
Oh, some perseverance.
And
Imagine the 4 years IIT Delhi. You would have been sitting somewhere, some get career
yeah,
job,
and to be,
maybe somewhere else. So
yeah,
it's just
that's right.
amazing.
So my first academic position that I got was as an assistant professor in Newfoundland, and that was at the age of 35, somewhere around that time. And then after that, slowly and steadily, the Boston training was very helpful. It brought a new perspective. It opened up a field of research, and I did begin to explore a focus for my work, which was in genetics and inborn errors of metabolism.
Oh, this happened before you went into epilepsy.
This happened almost simultaneously
Simultaneously.
while I was doing because there's this overlap, which a significant proportion of individuals with epilepsy may have genetic underpinnings. So,
So can you give an example, like an anecdote of a child, so that the audience can understand what is this you had, just a scenario or something like that.
right. So let me circle back to where it was that. So there are a number of cases that we saw where there was a strong family history of epilepsy. There was an uncle or an aunt or a distant cousin or a first
Hmm.
cousin. And as I got exposed to more of rotations in genetics, we found that number of children who attended genetics clinics for a variety of problems, maybe as intellectual disability or syndromes, genetic syndromes, had a significant component of epilepsy.
Oh,
They also suffered from epileptic seizures.
on one
So,
side the learning disability, other side epilepsy, other side some other
yes,
metabolic issue.
so
So it's a combination of different things.
it could be a combination of many things. So,
And
s-
the parents may not even be knowing that all this coexists, what's going on, different doctors having to
absolutely,
manage these things.
absolutely.
And child
So,
doesn't know how to complain. The
uh,
children are very small.
yeah,
It's quite
because of the complexity of this problem of epilepsy, one does require additional training to to be able to sift through all of those risk factors, variables that you are forced to look at when you're trying to find the cause of the epileptic
epilepsy.
seizures.
I remember my mother telling me that when I was a child, 2, 3 years, I had one high fever once, and I apparently had some kind of an epileptic fit. And she had taken me to hospital, and she was sponging me desperately in the night. The doctor said, "Don't stop sponging," and she was like quite panicky about it. And never happened again, from what I know. So, and I'm a neurosurgeon functioning, don't even know about it. So, what is this febrile convulsions all about? That's the commonest thing that you people hear and things like that. Since you mentioned genetics, somebody in the family having this, we don't want to go too deep into a genetic, discussion.
Right.
But I definitely want you to talk to our global audience about consanguinity.
Yes, yes, yes.
I think that's the commonest, one of the commonest causes of this, where the recessive gene becomes expressive because of all this marrying with the family, or whatever that is called,
Right.
for us, for
Right.
the asti, or what we call as the inheritance,
Inheritance.
or nonsense that goes on.
Yeah.
Even in our country, it goes. I think it must be a global problem. I think in different ways. What do you think? We've
Yeah.
gone so many different
Yeah.
countries.
That's a very good topic to maybe start about when we start talking about the genetics of epilepsy.
Correct.
So we recognize our current state of our knowledge recognizes that that epilepsy has genetic basis, albeit in a significant proportion of cases, the genetic aspect may not be as obvious.
That's the catch.
Yeah, that's the catch.
Yeah.
So what happens is that particularly in childhood epilepsy, there should not be a
Diagnosis?
mistaken notion
Okay.
that there has to be a family history of epilepsy to make a genetic condition. So in this context, consanguinity is an important concept to understand. So what is consanguinity? So consanguinity is a situation where most often individuals who come together as a couple to produce and choose a reproductive option are related as first degree,
Blood relatives is what
as
we call.
blood relatives,
Huh.
as it is called. So these first degree
First degree.
relationships.
What do you mean by first degree?
So if they are two branches of the families,
Mhm.
let's say two brothers marry two separate individuals, but their children are first cousins.
Correct.
So if these first cousins
Marry each
marry
other.
each other, they are inheriting or it may be the other way, two sisters marry, and they have their own children.
In India, I
And
remember the commonest thing that happens is, in Kannada we say Sodar Mava,
yeah,
or the mother's brother.
yeah.
That's the
So
commonest thing they said, to
yes,
keep the
yes,
the
yes,
inheritance inside the
yes.
family.
So what happens in genetics is that these individuals have shared genetic information,
Correct.
and there is
There's nothing new there. There's no new.
no, they have overlapping
That's
genetic
exactly.
information. And so what happens is that if they happen to carry a fault, let us say a mutation as it
Correct.
is known in
Or
genetic
a
terms,
manufacturing defect, or whatever you call it. It's not a
a
manufacturing.
change in the genetic code.
Yeah.
And of course, it is present in only, we've got something called as alleles.
Hmm.
So in these, we have genes in pairs.
Correct.
These, if you have one mutational change, the individual himself may not be affected by a condition, but if two affected genes on an allele are present, then that person is considered to be
Carrier.
be affected.
Affected. Sorry.
In the
Sorry.
homozygous state.
So, sorry.
So
Affected.
if you have only one affected gene, then it's a heterozygous state,
Correct,
and that
correct.
individual would be a carrier.
Correct.
And if they have two affected genes in pairs in an allele, then they are likely to
True.
be homozygous for the condition.
Correct.
And because there is no corrective gene effect, this individual may manifest with a disease.
So the disease
So-
actually shows up for
yeah.
them.
So this was, the basis for what we call as Mendelian inheritance pattern. So consanguinity results in what is called as loss of heterozygosity. So, without going into too
Loss of
much of
heterozygous. That's the key.
genetics, in other words, what happens is that what distinguishes me from you is that there is genetic variation,
Correct.
right? And so when people there when a zygote is being formed, there are sets of genes in the sperms and in the ovum that is
Correct.
coming together.
Correct.
And there's a process of genetic recombination that occurs that
True.
allows for mixing up
Correct. Correct.
traits and so
True.
on,
True.
so that two individuals in the same family are not identical entirely.
In fact, that's why we say in our this one that don't marry people from the same gotra, things like that, because they
Correct.
say
So yeah, that's
technically,
right.
so
Technically,
even
it's in a
scientifically
way,
from the past is the
scientifically,
same. Yes, it's
it is a
amazing.
valid,
Yes, valid.
probably a
Yeah,
valid way of reducing the
correct,
likelihood of
correct.
consanguinity.
True, true.
So when
And
individuals,
also maximizing the
yeah,
this one
but
heterogeneity.
but one should also remember that not only, of course, consanguinity increases your risk of getting a recessive gene by Mendelian rules, because there are two individuals
Correct,
who are carriers coming
correct, correct.
together. So the child will have two affected genes, will carry two affected mutations, and so will manifest with the condition. But these things can also happen in a random stochastic manner. That two
Really?
individuals, yes. So, so this is
So,
the
are you saying that every man and woman should get a genetic test done before they get married? I mean, that will
I
be too
would.
much to
There are people in certain ethnic communities
doing that.
that they're doing that. For example, for instance, in I think that amongst the Jewish population,
Mm-hmm,
the Ashkenazi
mm-hmm,
Jewish population is a very high carrier frequency
mm-hmm,
of certain
mm-hmm,
diseases like Tay-Sachs and so
mm-hmm.
on. And so in those communities,
They do this?
genetic screening is done for two individuals coming together, and this is an important part of genetic counseling in families where these traits
Yeah,
are
some of the things
identified.
when we have genetic, we do also the
Yeah,
genetic counseling. And
we have
when
to
they
take
come and
that into
ask
account.
us, can I have a child? Is that, yeah, what's the risk of my
So,
child getting this and things like that? So
what
that's
I would
really.
say is that if you identify an affected individual, often labeled as a proband,
Mm-hmm.
then you see it is important to screen parents and family members so that they can understand the risks when they exercise their reproductive options.
At least we'll bring it to the forefront, at least know what is going on, because everybody is
Absolutely.
blind otherwise.
Absolutely. So I think this
You
is one
see,
of the things that geneticists have to do, and it's part of what they take on when they go on a journey to identify a genetic basis for a condition.
I think they should also get to the ground, and probably I should get one geneticist on this program sometime,
Yes.
because what happens is the layman doesn't understand this. It sounds too high funda, too scientific,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And the moment you don't understand, you shut off your brain, and
Correct.
then you do what you want. Like there's always somebody used to say, see, in the olden days, people would have 5 children, 8 children, 10 children,
Right.
and the one or two manufacturing defects was accepted. But nowadays, when people are having one child, 2 children, or three, and this competitive world, it's very difficult. So
Yeah.
knowing these things, I think
Yeah.
will.
So I think one could probably uh, at a very basic level involve a discussion of genetics principles in during education in school.
I'm not really
So
sure whether it's
so
how much
in
is happening right
particularly,
now.
and it would be
Not
a
much was there
seminal,
when we
it
were
is a
there.
simple and a seminal change to bring about to educate children who are at least having a high school education to
True.
understand the basics of genetics principles.
Like how we have an applied medicine, I think we should have that applied genetics to say how
Absolutely. At
how it
least my
comes in.
feeling is that high school biology should certainly deal because they are taught Mendelian
Oh, I have to
genetics.
check whether the
Uh,
syllabus
I
is.
I think
I'm
they
not sure.
certainly we certainly uh, knew even in my high school days. What was autosomal recessive, what was
Correct.
dominant,
Yes,
and so on. So those basic principles were
basics
there,
were
but
there.
perhaps it needed to go into a little more detail when
Because
you're
you see
covering.
that I'm saying that because I know the fundas we knew, but how it translates, because you still hear educated people who've gone to school doing exactly the same.
Yeah.
I've had doctors who have done this. I
Right.
mean, that is a sin according to me.
Yeah.
I mean, knowing everything else,
Yeah.
but still the property or the thing takes precedence on this. I tell a couple of my friends, I said, "Are you serious that you have done
Yeah.
this? And what's the point in all your education?"
That's right.
Yeah, I mean,
But it's of course there are sort of be a little cautious in saying that it's not a given that every consanguineous union will result in,
I
there's
agree, but
statistically a 25%
yeah,
chance of carrying a recessive gene into an affected individual. But every pregnancy has the same risk. So there may be other children who are born who may be normal. So families, people tend to catch on to these things where, oh, this worked perfectly well for my cousin who married his first cousin, but it hasn't worked for me. So this kind of
true,
illogical
true. It's
sort of
illogical. Yeah, the phrase is
conclusions can be
illogical.
drawn. But
Correct.
I think because we are looking at the social implications of all of this, I think some knowledge of genetics, some knowledge of counseling should be probably imperative in families or individuals who have a
True.
degree of consanguinity and to discuss with their physicians. But also to remember that in non-consanguineous unions, there can be genetic changes that can occur,
Which are random,
sporadic,
yeah, sporadic.
random,
Yeah, agree,
stochastic kind
agree,
of thing.
agree.
So ultimately, in 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 the event of an affected child, either way, the child who has a genetic form of epilepsy has the condition, unfortunately, and so
It doesn't settle down. It's always at the back of the mind. Everybody's life gets altered because you're thinking what's going on. Is it really true like that, or do you think they can have a normal epilepsy? I'm talking
yeah.
specifically for
So
epilepsy.
so I think
Is that why this Scrooge of the possessing came because of the curse? I'll never be normal again.
yes,
I always
I think
the one of the common things stories I tell my patients just to remove this thing is the stigma is the John T. Rhodes, the famous cricketer from South Africa. He was apparently an epileptic.
right,
And he was jumping around doing everything else. So I said,
right,
see, if John D. Rhodes can do what he can do, then obviously there is hope and there is definite thing. So
right,
what would you say as a epileptologist to
right.
parents and the children and
Yeah.
everybody else who are
So I think
listening to
it's
us?
probably a wrong. I mean, the social implications because of the long history of having given epilepsy a bad name are quite profound. I
Correct.
agree with you that making a diagnostic label or giving a diagnostic label of epilepsy in an individual has very profound
Very profound.
social
Epilepsy,
for the
psychiatry,
it
TB,
affects the whole trajectory of that individual's life.
yes, and the family.
So,
Yeah,
which
especially.
drives home to me the next point
Hmm.
that, when a diagnosis of epilepsy is being considered, has the diagnosis been established correctly? Because
What do
once
you
it,
mean by that?
well, so let's talk a little bit about
Sure,
epilepsy.
sure. I
So it
think so.
brings us to the core of our. So
Perfect.
what is core of our discussion? So what is epilepsy? Um, Epilepsy is a medical condition where an individual has what we recognize as a change in the physical cognitive processes which are temporary, triggered, they occur out of the blue.
Hmm.
They can start like that or a gradual build up process,
Hmm.
and then they have an end,
Hmm.
and then there is a return to the baseline functioning of the individual. This process of what we call as a seizure, one that is possessed, seized.
Correct.
Um,
See, there also the
yeah,
term exactly comes from the same
so a
place.
seizure is the sort of main principal manifestation.
We call it fits. Yeah, the local term here is
There are
called
many
fits.
different
Yeah,
terms that convulsions, fits,
fits. Yeah,
many
they're all the
people,
same.
yeah. So, but not everything that looks like a seizure is definitely an epilepsy. This
What
is
do
an
you mean?
important. Let me elaborate.
Yes,
These are
you
good
must. You
questions.
must.
So, an epileptic seizure by qualification is one which is the result of an electrical storm in the brain.
Like a short circuit going on in the brain.
Yeah, so we know that our brain is constantly producing electrical signals.
Correct.
And the normal functioning of the brain involves a channeling of the right amount of signals interpreted in either a form of what we call as excitation or inhibition. So these are counter
Correct.
processes.
Correct.
And when there is an imbalance between excitation and
Hmm.
inhibition at a very basic level, then there's too much excitation or too limited inhibition, then this balance is disrupted. And that sets about a process of electrical signals reverberating through the electrical circuits, the neural circuits, that is, nerve cells talking to each other through connections. Um, this process sets about recruitment of whole neuronal populations in the brain, which disrupt normal function. So, as a result, the individual may experience a change in the level of consciousness.
That means they can become unconscious or something.
They may lose contact with the surroundings. Unconscious is an extreme situation. They may not be able to communicate with others. They may not be able to understand others. So, in other words,
they'll be awake, but
they will be awake.
So,
but
see, I'm sorry to pause you here. See, the layman's understanding of epilepsy is you have to go like this,
yes,
to fall down with froth coming in the mouth.
yes,
Only that is epilepsy.
yes,
They don't think epilepsy means anything else.
yes.
So, and for me to even explain to them is, as a neurosurgeon, becomes quite challenging. So, can you sort of take it from there and say what do you mean by loss of contact with the environment?
So the very dramatic depiction that you gave is probably the most common notion that the public carries, where an individual emits a sudden cry, falls to the ground, and has huge giant motor movements which are very rhythmic and froths at the mouth. And
they give key in the hand.
Yes, that's right. And people would keep metal in their hand. This is the dramatic presentation that is often mistaken as being possessed by an evil spirit.
Correct.
These are called grand mal seizures or generalized seizures. And in this form of epilepsy, which is one kind amongst many kinds of epilepsy, the entire brain is having this electrical storm reverberating through it. So the entire brain, both hemispheres of the brain, are involved. And so we call it a generalized epilepsy. And so if one were to run an EEG, which is the test we use for recording the electrical activity of
electroencephalogram, not ECGs for the heart, EEGs for the brain, for the audience.
Absolutely. So the electroencephalogram, which is where the individual has electrodes stuck on the head, and the electrical recording is seen, that would show abnormal electrical discharges emanating from both sides of the brain, and they are very synchronized. And
who reads these EEGs? Who does the EEG? Because that's important.
Yes.
Because ECG is just one small strip versus I've seen piles of EEG things. So it's quite a challenge.
So
it looks like
things have moved along very well now. So electroencephalography is now a well-established technique. It requires, of course, people who are trained to record the signal, how to place the electrodes correctly. And it requires an understanding of some degree of physics and electrical principles. And so you have to have a science education.
So we all run away. People say, because I don't like mathematics and physics, I try to become a doctor. There's so much in our day-to-day world that with these numbers and all, it's crazy.
So one does require, there are requirements in North America, for instance, and I'm sure that where a certain degree of training is required to fulfill the requirements, and you have to do an examination to certify as a technologist. So there are two sets of people who are critical to this process. One is the person who records the information and creates the EEG record. And that
whole bunch.
Now, of course, everything is not done. It's done digitally, and you can see it on a screen.
Agreed.
You can manipulate the signals, and there are huge advantages in doing so.
I agree.
And now there is software to help you read. Other side of the equation is the one who is the electroencephalographer, who is interpreting this electrical information. And his role is a critical one. And in order for him to perform his role, he has to be trained. He has to be trained. He too also has to understand the principles of physics and electrical, to some degree, electrical engineering. To understand what kind of rhythms are normal to the brain and what kind of rhythms or abnormal discharges, how do they appear, what is the morphology, how do we localize where in the brain this discharge is coming from, requires some degree of even understanding of mathematics at a higher level. So the electroencephalographer can usually is a physician who is specially trained in the
So
interpretation
somebody
of the,
like you who
yeah.
is an
So
epileptologist.
in part of my fellowship training
Okay.
involved training in interpreting EEGs and so on. So people do neurophysiology fellowships they in North America, or they can do epilepsy fellowships and be trained in EEG. So usually, I mean, if you read about 6 months to a year of training in reading EEGs, about 1,000 EEGs, and under the supervision of someone who is already qualified,
Expert.
you become a reasonably adept at
And that you say is very important to prevent misdiagnosis and
correct.
before.
So
So that's where you are
yeah,
heading with this whole
yeah. So what I have found, and I think sometimes these things, there is some in the beginning there was a cavalier approach. A lot of cowboys were practicing in the field, as they say, and so there was a lot of overdiagnosis of epilepsy
Oh,
because even what would we call as benign
like
variations in the electrical signals were interpreted as being epileptic form, or those that are markers for epileptic seizures. And of course, the underdiagnosis element is
rather
also
sad.
You misrecognize, or you say, oh, this looks like a benign element and can be ignored.
So both sides are
Both
dangerous.
sides, yes. So but a critical role is played by the clinician in providing the right amount of clinical information to the electroencephalographer.
I was just going to come to that because I think I always say that in an MRI is done by the technician, report written by radiologist, but we finally decide what has to be done for the patient because we've got the clinical information that's going on, and that's exactly where you hit. So it's a combination of a lot of things, and not just in isolation. You just take one thing, and that's the
Right.
point you're also
So I
driving
think the
Well
whole
said.
point about the physician who is assessing the child has to give the right information to the electroencephalographer to be able to put two and two together.
Correct.
For him to make sense of what he's seeing, because he's not seeing the patient.
Yes,
He has very
exactly.
little information on what the seizure looks like. And so unless he has the right information, he cannot provide you the right feedback. So that is that part of the equation.
Okay.
So coming back to an epileptic seizure, so as I said, it's very important to understand that not all seizures are necessarily epileptic. So for instance,
All action that looks like a
epilepsy,
seizure.
not
Yes.
everything that shakes is epilepsy. Okay.
That's an important message. Yeah.
So not everything that shakes is epilepsy, because I can give you a couple of
Yes, sir,
dramatic
you
examples.
definitely.
So this is from real life.
Yeah.
So, a teenager has taken a hot shower, and she has taken what is in our communities a head bath.
Headbutt.
So she's put lots of coconut oil, shikakai, all of those things. Then she's come out, and then her hair is being brushed by her mother. And she's standing in front of the mirror, and her mother sees her going pale. Her eyes roll up, and she slumps, and then suddenly starts moving in that somewhat dramatic way.
Okay, the seizure way.
Yeah. So, and then of course, the story is told, the mother, and of course, today's technology, everything can be videoed, which is a great tool.
I know.
So, you have the video, the child is shaking, goes to the doctor, and is labeled as having an epileptic seizure. But the doctor did not, or may have overlooked, what were the antecedents, what were the circumstances in which the seizure happened.
I see. Like?
The very description that I gave you at the outset. The child had had a hot bath and had been experiencing her hair being vigorously, the scalp being stimulated.
Okay.
And with your knowledge of neuroanatomy, you know that reflex would result in vagal inhibition of the heart rate. As a result of which the heart slowed sufficiently, the cerebral perfusion to drop below, and then
like a cardiac syncope more than anything else.
So these are called reflex seizures. So this is a very common thing in children. So
though it is named seizure, it's not a seizure.
It's not an epileptic seizure.
Correct.
Another common situation that we encounter in very young children, which is again a reflex seizure, is a breath holding spell.
Correct.
So the child cries and then either goes blue or goes very pale and then loses consciousness and then shakes and then recovers consciousness. So breath holding spells, for instance, are not epileptic, but may be mislabeled as epilepsy, may be treated as epilepsy, and you have lifelong implications for. And of course, most of children with breath holding spells do outgrow their seizures. So drives home the point of why establishing a correct diagnosis is so critical.
But let me ask you a devil's advocate question. So what? Now I've overdiagnosed. It's better safe than sorry. I'll give a medicine. I mean, so
But the
what's so what are you trying to tell the audience? It's saying that why should this misdiagnosis be so critical? In what sense?
right. So let me make two very important
Mm.
points. One is that you're giving a diagnostic label that will have profound social implications for this child.
Yes, the social impact,
It will change.
psychological, social. Yeah.
It will have dramatic effect on parents, their relationships, and to give an extreme example, they may choose to re-examine their history, blame themselves, the guilt, all of those
Or even a
consequences.
divorce, pull the child out of school. So many things could
So many
possible.
things are possible.
I
So
I, I
negative
get. I didn't realize.
outcomes.
Correct.
The second is that if you give a medication, are you weighing the effect of the medication on
The
the
side
brain?
effect of the medication or the
Oh,
what of
yes.
the effect.
See, we do not have, even to this day, we do not have targeted medications that only work on those affected nerve cells or areas of the brain. We do have a new generation of medications which are more or better designed and so on and so forth, but they blanket the whole nervous
Correct. Carpet
system.
bombing, like a carpet bombing.
So because they affect the whole nervous system, there are consequences for cognitive functioning, for the child's school, for his attention, learning, all of those things. Plus, you have other somatic side effects. For instance, some medications may affect the liver function, some may affect kidney function, some may affect, the heart, and so on and so forth. And so you're exposing the child to the risks of unrecognized risks of using a pharmacological medication. And so the responsibility lies with the physician to make the right diagnosis
Got
and only then prescribe treatment. So one of the critical roles of a pediatric neurologist or a trained physician is to really sift through the evidence and making the correct diagnosis.
So it's very important. So please understand that this video you listen to Dr. Prasad and say, okay, I'm going to stop medicines for my child because he's saying this. That's not what he's trying to say. So you have to go back to your pediatric epileptologist or pediatric neurologist and go through this to make sure if you have a doubt, please ask the questions to your physician and he'll be the right person wisely to be able to make the decision.
Yeah.
Please don't make your own decisions. This is not a treatment video that we are just creating awareness with what's going on.
I'd like to drive home the point that any parent who is listening to this or watching this podcast, or who may come into contact with an individual or a child who may be suspected of having an epileptic seizure, it behoves them to seek uh, opinion of a well-trained pediatric neurologist to ensure that the right steps are being taken, efforts are being made to get a diagnosis.
Perfect. Well said.
That is a critical part.
Yes.
The second is that the second thing that I've observed is that we are impatient as consumers to want to have immediate results.
Instant gratification.
Correct. So one of the things sometimes that happens is that it takes a little while for the right treatment or for the right diagnosis to be established, for the right treatment to be given, and of course, even more critical is the fact that if there has been a misdiagnosis, then to correct that.
Correct.
So I think parents have to be patient and
Patient.
not jumping to conclusions that this doctor is ineffective. He didn't fix the
Doctor
seizure.
shopping. A lot of people do doctor shopping.
Exactly. So, so that is something which is detrimental eventually to the child's eventual care, optimal
It's a
care.
very important point you have raised, that they should find the right doctor, and once they're happy with the doctor, stick with the same doctor, because each of us have a plan in the mind as we go through the process, and every plan may not be visible on day one.
Right.
I think doctor shopping or not to do doctor, because this is not like a cold coffee or treatment. The treatment is done in 5 days. That's not what it is.
Right. So the second, I think what's important while we are talking about this is to circle back to what are the different kinds of seizures
Yes. I was just going to go back to that. Now that we have
so
spoken of the common things.
so we were talking about what happens in epileptic seizure, and if you remember, I said there is a transient
Yes.
disturbance, maybe
Yes.
in the level of
Yes.
consciousness. The child may lose the ability to speak or
True.
may lose the ability to comprehend simple commands that are delivered, and may just simply look around in an absent-minded fashion, may do some repetitive movements with their hands
Like,
as
can
if
you give, is it possible to give a demo so that they can just,
it's like so for example, I'm looking around and then I just make some uh, you know then I'm picking at clothes, and I'm just saying something that is not very meaningful, and then I go into what may be a more pronounced seizure, or I may form very abnormal posture with my hands before entering into a shaking phase.
or it may never happen.
Or it may never
Ah.
happen. The seizure may terminate, and then the individual comes back. I come back, and the individual can connect with the surroundings, start responding to.
And this can happen from a few seconds to more than a minute or a couple of
It can
minutes.
happen from seconds to minutes,
Correct.
sometimes to hours.
Correct.
So
That's very important for
so
people to know.
the important point is that we recognize that there are many types of
Yeah,
seizures,
I think you should tell.
and we recognize seizures by the term we use, technical term of semiology. That is
Semiology.
what happens, the clinical description, first-hand view of what happened during the seizure. How did it start? What happened next? What happened after that? How did it stop? And what did the patient do after it stopped? Did it take time to recover to baseline neurological functioning? All of these elements form
How long it took to wake up or
yeah, the clinical description of a seizure. And of course, we have technology at our hand, so doing a video can convey a lot of
I
information.
know the phones is so convenient now.
But the most important thing that a caregiver or a parent has to understand is that the events that are truly epileptic tend to be stereotyped.
What do you mean by that?
That is, the epileptic seizure, for the most part, in the beginning, one event, and the second event thereafter will be very similar to
The
one
pattern will be the same.
Yeah.
That helps.
That helps. Sometimes, of course, the same individual may have multiple seizure
That's
types.
right.
And so I think recording clinical observation, the better the quality of the description you provide the physician, the better the chances of making a correct diagnosis.
I think, like you said, with the current phone available with the video camera, that's the best, so that you can, rather than you describing, just show the video, and that's really helpful.
Some seizures can be very subtle.
Correct.
A common type of epilepsy, which is in children, is often mistaken for daydreaming. So the child goes to school, and for a few minutes he just flutters his eyes and he tunes out, and then he comes back. And the teacher may notice it and say, "Oh, you're daydreaming."
Don't sleep, something like that.
Or having some
Daydreaming.
attentional problem.
That's the right phrase.
Or sometimes these children may get diagnosed as having attention deficit disorder.
Really?
Yeah.
That has happened?
That has also happened.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
again, an example of how misdiagnosis of epilepsy can take place. And so again,
clinically, it's so important, because
to
you
get the
can't bank
description.
just on a scan. See, people's habit is, I go for a test, my test will tell me everything.
Right.
And in neurology, it's not true at all.
It's not true. It's not true.
True at all.
So part of what the neurologist does as plays a very critical role in gathering the information that is needed to make a diagnosis, at least in epilepsy. There are many types of epilepsy. So we talked about the generalized epilepsy.
This daydreaming is called absence epilepsy.
Absence, or what we call as petit mal epilepsy. So these are this is also a generalized epilepsy, because if you look at the EEG changes during the absence epilepsy, they are involving both
Both sides.
hemispheres. They are synchronized discharges and so on. And there is a particular electrical signature which is very easily helps
Picked up.
the electroencephalographer to make that diagnosis. Nowadays, we also have this added benefit of recording video simultaneously with the EEG, and if we are able to capture the event as it happens, that is the gold standard.
So why do you need that? See, now if I capture the video, the mother or father, and then you have the EEG, it should be good enough. Why do you need this video
No,
EEG?
because the EEG that you're capturing is not a real-time recording of what is happening in the child's brain when the
At that
event.
time.
Yes.
So you want both to be
both,
captured at the same time.
So that is
Why is that so important?
Because that is really, sometimes the epileptic seizures are very subtle, and just doing a routine EEG may not give you the answer. Sometimes children come back to you again and again. You've done 3 routine EEGs, and while in majority of cases you may be able to pick up the diagnosis, the routine EEG may not yield the information, and therefore we often admit children for 3 or sometimes 24 hours, sometimes 3 or 4 days, bring them into hospital and connect them up to a video EEG. So this continuous video EEG can provide very useful information, particularly if the events are captured in real time.
I think, that's an important thing you have raised, because even in my practice, we get post-traumatic epilepsy, on different cards. And many times when we do the EEG when they're normal, the EEG is normal.
Right.
And then they say, sir, the EEG is normal. Why are you medicating me?
Yeah.
Now then I have to explain to them that ictal EEG, interictal EEG, how that difference is there.
Right.
Within 6 hours to 24 hours, the EEG can become normalized.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it's not there,
Right.
so on and so forth. It does,
Right.
so which means that we have to spend time to
Right.
explain to the, make them understand what's
Yes.
going on.
And yes, that is why a pediatric neurologist would play a critical role with his background, his training. He'd play a critical role in helping, communicate this information. And it's really a lot of medical care in this field is really good communication.
Communication. I agree with you.
What I can convey to the audience here is that epilepsy in itself is a very large field. The advances.
It's not just somebody shaking like this.
The advances that have taken place over the last, maybe last 100 years have not only opened up the avenues for better diagnosis, better treatment, and even possibilities of cure, like I explained in the first case that we went back to.
So I want to ask you one more question. I remember my mother telling me that when I was a child, 2-3 years, I had one high fever once, and I apparently had some kind of an epileptic fit. And she had taken me to hospital, and she was sponging me desperately in the night. The doctor said, "Don't stop sponging," and she was like quite panicky about it. And never happened again, from what I know. So, and I'm a neurosurgeon functioning, don't even know about it. So, what is this febrile convulsions all about? That's the commonest thing that you people hear and things like that.
Yeah, that's a very good way to start talking about different kinds of seizures, and maybe that would lead us to a discussion on outcomes as well.
Perfect.
So febrile seizures are a type of seizures which are most commonly mistaken for epilepsy. Fever happens to be a trigger for these seizures. And there are some theories that suggest that in some individuals who are vulnerable to have febrile seizures, there may be a family history of febrile convulsions, or as it used to be called, but that the temperature of the brain has something to do with, so when the brain gets overheated, there are some changes that take place that make the individual vulnerable to have an epileptic seizure. Not an epileptic seizure, but a seizure. It is a phenomenon, obviously, there is some electrical change taking place in the brain, but compared to a real epileptic seizure or in other forms of epilepsy, the large majority of febrile seizures are benign.
Okay.
They do
benign
not
means, doesn't.
that the outcome is good.
Good.
That children outgrow their febrile seizures over time, like you probably did, and that they do not need to be medicated. All that needs to be done is that there are risk factors that could predict the chances of recurrence, and the parent can easily be trained to recognize the onset of a seizure or an onset of a fever, and take some measures, simple measures to cool down the body. Antipyretics or anti-fever treatments be given, and a rescue medication in the event that the child
That was
goes.
not available in the past.
That
Now,
was not available, but
yeah,
now
now it's available.
it's
That's right.
available, and so this is a very common protocol that is practiced in the West
True,
and also
true,
over
yeah.
here. So most pediatric neurologists
True,
will do
true.
that. The parents should be trained in first aid, CPR, as they
True, true.
call it, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I think it's always good for every family, parent, and caregiver to have this ability, so
True.
that there are rare instances of unfortunate events
True
happening.
cardiac
So I
arrest
think
because
it's
of this.
important that first aid
But, true.
be.
Unfortunately, Prasad, unlike the West, the CPR training, somehow this Indian population is so fatalistic. They don't look at it. They don't train. They don't think it's important.
Yeah.
And even those who train don't think they should refresh it, because if people like us do it in the hospital, so we have an inherent way of learning to do it regularly.
Yeah.
So I think that is very important for them to know.
I think basic life support certification is a very useful skill to have.
Absolutely.
And there are well-recognized programs.
Yes.
So I think, basic life support measures should be taught at school.
Yes.
It's a useful skill for every
Absolutely.
individual to have.
Absolutely.
And periodically they should be
They
revisited.
should be upgraded, especially those, because
Yeah.
otherwise, they have to, sharpen their knife, as what I say.
So let's move to some other. So we talked in the earlier part of our discussion that not everything that shakes is epilepsy.
Correct.
And then we have this kind of a situation where there is a close relationship to epilepsy, because there are some children who have febrile seizures in the beginning and then transition to having
Oh.
real epilepsy. So this is one of a group of, and some of these have a genetic basis.
Okay.
So there is one particular one which goes by the name of a French epileptologist by name of Charlotte Dravet.
Okay.
So Dravet syndrome is one such epileptic condition where the child has febrile seizures to start with, usually hemiconvulsions, so affecting one half of the body.
Only one side.
And it often shifts sides, and these seizures are very prolonged. And then eventually the child develops multiple seizure types. So multiple seizure types in the same individual.
Oh, that means once.
So they can have myoclonic jerks, sudden electrical shock-like contractions. They can have drop attacks, which is atonic seizures. They can have other types of clouding of consciousness, which may be like an atypical absence. So multiple seizure types in the same individual. So
drop attack means they just drop down,
like a brick.
Like a brick.
So it's important, again, drives home the point that recognizing the different seizure types is very critical.
So critical.
Let's move to the next part. Assuming that an individual has, we were talking about febrile seizures, and then there's one group of individuals who have later on in life developed temporal lobe epilepsy, and they may have had very long febrile seizures in childhood. So these are risk factors that have to be recognized. And also, I think it's good time to talk about what are called as prolonged seizures, which are also go by the name of status epilepticus.
Correct.
These are particularly harmful to the brain. Long seizures cause secondary brain injury. So it's imperative that any child who has had one episode of status epilepticus should have adequate workup, medical intervention if needed, as either rescue protocols and treatment with specific anti-seizure medications if needed. And every effort should be made for early intervention to prevent the prolonged seizure taking place.
Correct. Very, very important what you said, because one seizure can kill a patient.
So assuming that a right diagnosis is made, and I think somewhat time constraints prevent me from sort of going on. I could go on for hours.
We'll do another episode if necessary, but I think we're just trying to cover these superficial aspects.
Absolutely. I think that to talk about all the different kinds of epilepsy would require other episodes. Other discussions. But this would be a good segue to that.
Yes.
So I think assuming that the right diagnosis is made, for that you need the clinical information piece, you need the EEG information piece, and you need sometimes imaging to look
Correct.
at the brain.
Correct.
These three,
Like a CT scan or MRI or something.
typically an MRI is more informative, and there are special sequences that radiologists can use to extract maximum information available. And so we recognize that there can be structural reasons, things that are not right with the structure of the brain. There's a scar, there's a tumor, there's some other inflammation
Sure.
that may be associated with epileptic seizures as a manifestation. So these three modalities come together to make a diagnosis of epilepsy.
That's
Other specialized investigations may be needed if you're planning some aggressive intervention like epilepsy surgery and so on, and we won't go into that right now.
Sure.
But these three are very essential.
Perfect.
Once the diagnosis of epilepsy has been made, then usually the neurologist will be able to guide the parents to understand the basis of this condition, what type of epilepsy it is. Many times in early childhood, genetic testing may be necessary. And then you see he will
It's
make
also
it.
to prognosticate, yeah, that's
Yes. So genetic testing is important because it gives you 2 or 3 bits of information. One is that it provides a closure into the family to help understand what is running the epilepsy or what is causing the epilepsy, what is the basis of this electrical disturbance in the
correct.
brain.
Correct.
With the best genetic technologies that are available at present, which includes terms like whole exome sequencing, targeted gene panels, whole genome sequencing, we are able to make a diagnosis of a genetic epilepsy in only about 50% of 40 to 50% of cases if we are very
Right now. Yeah.
right now. So there is a whole group of conditions where even though we may suspect a genetic basis, we may not be able to make a
evidence, yeah.
diagnosis. The second part of making a genetic diagnosis or understanding the genetic basis of epilepsy is that it may help guide the course of treatment using
just
the
gonna
right
go-
medication.
True.
So, for example, in Dravet syndrome, it's a sodium channel mutation, and you do not want to use a drug like lamotrigine or carbamazepine, which may have adverse effects. So, because it may worsen the epilepsy. So I think it's important that the neurologist is, and this is where the neurology training and
just
experience is so critical
comment.
to recognize the right drug.
I think there must be more than 35, 40
No,
anti-epileptics
not
right
that
now.
many. Maybe about 20 that are currently commonly. I mean, like old ones,
Okay.
new ones. We have about 3
Correct.
generations. The third generation.
True. So what you're saying very importantly to our global viewers is that epilepsy is not true. Each epilepsy has its own source of thing coming in and more mechanisms because of which the medications can be tailored to make sure we maximize the benefit, minimize the side
Right,
effects of
right.
that's sort of what you're saying.
So, and
Very
that,
valuable.
and then you see the neurologist has to make that critical decision of which medication to give, which dose
Correct.
to choose, because usually we
Correct.
try to use the lowest dose necessary to control the seizure and avoid
Correct.
side effects.
Correct.
It is also imperative for the neurologist to explain to the parent what are the side effects involved, what to look for,
Correct.
and where it is necessary to choose an alternative drug. We recognize that here is where a significant proportion of medication epilepsies in children which are considered to have a good response, in other words, they respond to one medication, are called a monotherapy, tend to have a better prognosis. Children who break through and have seizures after the introduction of drug 1 or drug A and then respond for a short time to drug B or a combination of drug A plus B or drug A plus B plus C over a period of several weeks to months are the ones we have to worry about. They may have a form of what we call as drug resistant or treatment resistant epilepsy. And so when we are dealing with treatment resistant epilepsy, it behoves the neurologist to go back and look at the history again. Review the family history, review the history, review the examination, review the EEG, semiology, the imaging, so that you have identified all the necessary risk factors. For example, patient may have had a trauma, may have had trauma, head trauma with a serious concussion or a brain injury, which may have been overlooked, may have had a serious meningitis or an encephalitis in early life
Yeah, I was
that
just going
may
to
have
say that.
been missed. Or, for example, there may be a developmental abnormality in the brain, which we call as a focal cortical dysplasia, which may be missed very easily on imaging studies. And if you go back and look at it, you find that there is a. So those
Correct.
a trained
A trained eye becomes,
neuroradiologist, the appropriate sequences. So it behoves when you're dealing with a child who is not responding to treatment, it behoves us to go back and re-examine the whole story, dig a
dig
little
a little
deeper,
deeper.
and review the information. And that may provide avenues for further treatment, such as you were talking about the possibility of a surgical treatment for epilepsy, particularly focal. So, one subset of patients who have drug resistant epilepsy may have an underlying structural lesion that could be resected
Correct.
or treated surgically.
The focal cortical dysplasia is what
Yeah,
you're saying,
yeah.
FCD.
So the other type of treatment resistant epilepsy, the answer may lie in genetic testing, or they may have a genetic condition like tuberous sclerosis. So those are all they're all easily diagnosable once you have the right set of information
Correct.
and so on. Um, so it brings me to a group of disorders which we call as developmental epileptic encephalopathies in current terminology.
Okay.
And
I
let me
think it's a
explain.
new term, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. How new is that? Because even for me, I started hearing it only off late.
Yeah, so it's a new term. It's been put together by the International League Against Epilepsy,
Okay.
and basically what it denotes is an early onset epilepsy where there are two things that are happening. One is that there is a pre-existing neurological impairment that is manifesting as a developmental problem, on superimposed on which is the electrical storm that we talked about, that's adding an additional burden. So it's combination of these
Combination
two.
too.
So the electrical disturbance in the brain, which is almost constant
And that
and
keeps
pervasive,
worsening the.
and that keeps worsening. So this group of children are usually tend to have more severe epilepsy. They may have a very distinctive form of epilepsy called epileptic spasms, which may start very early in life, in the first few months of life. And one of the most well recognized conditions is called infantile spasms
Correct.
or West syndrome.
That's right.
And it's critical to make the diagnosis of these conditions early, because you need to investigate and you need to treat. And treatment can help modify outcomes, because the longer you go, there is some evidence from clinical research studies that delays in diagnosis add to the burden that the brain experiences over a period of time from this constant
True.
electrical
And apparently,
storm.
it was also much more difficult to control it, higher doses.
Yes, so often these children get onto polytherapy or multiple anti-seizure medications, and they don't respond to anything. Sometimes they may respond to a dietary form of treatment which is very old but has been revived. It's called the ketogenic diet,
Correct.
and the ketogenic diet has some advantages in that it not only may improve seizure control, reduce reliance on anti-seizure medications, and improve the overall cognitive picture of the child being more alert rather than being snowed under medications. So I think, which brings me to the fact that there are many modalities of treatments available, which really bring us back to this issue of hope. So even in the worst of circumstances, where very severe epilepsies happen,
What is severe epilepsy? How many seizures can somebody have in a day?
you can. There are children who experience 300, 400 seizures in a
Really?
day.
300?
Yeah, because they're very brief and
Oh, just
continuously
that
happening.
moment.
Yeah, momentary.
Ah.
So
It's important for them to know, because they
yeah,
think that I take one medicine, it should be okay. It may not be true.
it doesn't happen that way.
Yes, yes.
So let's say that maybe about 50 to 60% of epilepsies on the whole may respond very well to anti-seizure
Oh, that's
medications.
very encouraging.
And very critical to point out that anti-seizure medications are not a cure.
Got it.
They are simply a band-aid that prevents the child from having seizures
Like a
until the brain has been able to outgrow the tendency to have seizures. So currently, we describe seizure remission as being free of seizures after 10 years of anti-seizure medications. And there are various ways by
And
which we
that's
can.
taking the medications for 10 years
No,
on
no,
medication.
taken. No, no. Seizure remission
Hmm.
is different from cure.
Okay.
So seizure remission can happen if you are seizure free for 2 years on
Okay.
medication.
Uh-huh.
After that, it's a clinical decision as to when to take the patient off
Of the
treatment.
medication.
We have clinicians who are experienced, who have enough data, can make a decision as to what is the risk of recurrence if you were to take off the patient
it.
off medication. For instance, we would look at the EEG data, we would look at the underlying nature of the epilepsy, so on and so forth, and the treatment response to monotherapy, etc., before making a decision as this
Number
is an
of seizures he
individual
had.
who is likely to do well off treatment. And many times we may be successful in weaning the medication, but the seizures may come back after a couple of years.
Correct.
So that is a relapse. So seizures can remit and relapse over time, but a true remission, if it lasts for 10 years without a recurrence and off treatment, would be considered as technically a cure.
Yeah. Okay.
The likelihood of relapse after that
That's
is
the
small.
definition. Okay.
So, so we've talked about the bad epilepsies in a way briefly, about how early diagnosis is important. Genetic testing may be important in the early epilepsies. The seizure types are different. They can be multiple types, or they can be very severe in the form of epileptic spasms. So these are all important bits of information
Correct.
that parents need to know. And then we've talked a little bit about what is the treatment response to anti-seizure medications. Is there monotherapy response or polytherapy response, or what other avenues there are in the form of either re-exploration of possible surgical treatment, and also the possibility of a diet. There are other forms of treatments that are coming up in the form of surgical, lesioning of certain areas, stereotactically guided. There are responsive
Which people like
neurostim.
me do as a stereotactic neurosurgeon.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
And then there is responsive neurostimulation, where there is a device implanted which can record and then deliver an electrical this thing to disrupt the seizure process in the brain. So there are many avenues on the other side.
Again, it's a selection of patient and the
Absolutely.
appropriate technology or treatment becomes critical.
That becomes absolutely critical. And so I think what I can convey to the audience here is that epilepsy in itself is a very large field. The advances.
It's not just somebody shaking like this.
The
It's not as
advances
simple.
that have taken place over the last, maybe last 100 years have not only opened up the avenues for better diagnosis, better treatment, and even possibilities of cure, like I explained in the first case that we went back to, but also raise a whole idea of hope for patients who have epilepsy, and that better things are likely to come as science advances and opens up many more avenues for treatment. Particularly the genetic epilepsies may have a cure, or at least a better treatments available. It's because of what we call as gene therapy. Sometimes, the cause of an epilepsy may have very simple treatments, such as we have a group of epilepsies which we call as vitamin responsive epilepsies, just as an example, of which B6 pyridoxine dependent epilepsy is one where it can be associated with a very severe form of epilepsy. And it has to be diagnosed correctly. It has to be diagnosed early. And of course, there's a specific test for it, and we now have a genetic test for it as well. And so just supplementing with pyridoxine and a diet and something called as lysine restriction, a triple therapy, can significantly alter outcomes for these children. So the take-home point that I want to make is that it's critical to have the right diagnosis of epilepsy. And for that, you need to have a well-trained pediatric neurologist cast his eye on on your child, collect all the information possible, have the right diagnostic tools at his or her access, at
Yes.
his disposal, and putting together that information can play a critical role in changing the outcome. And of course, a lot of particularly those children who have a lot of seizures families experience a lot of disruption, because many times they have to rush the child to hospital, the child is having long seizures. And so the family life gets disrupted,
Correct.
marital relations get strained, so on and so forth. And I think that this is a huge social burden that is not just restricted to, it's all over the world. It's a
Exactly.
global
Global.
issue, and parents who deal with it require resilience, courage. It's important for parents to be well supported. There are parent support groups that you can form that are there. There is an International Bureau of Epilepsy, which advocates for, and of course, a lot of advocacy has to be done at the level of government, so the Ministry of Health can improve services, access to technologies, more specialists, additional training, and of course, most important, those learners who are watching this should be inspired to take up a career in pediatric neurology and epilepsy,
I
and
think so.
they can play a critical role in helping a large population of
Absolutely.
children.
Absolutely.
So finally, the whole idea of epilepsy care is really multidisciplinary.
True.
It requires the interventions of not only pediatric epileptologists or neurologists, but neurosurgeons, psychologists, neuropsychologists, rehab,
True.
OT, PT, sometimes, all of these disciplines, allied specialties. And most important, the family should be at the center of
Yes.
this care. And of course, family supports all around. And as far as possible, one always needs to look at the financial burden.
Yeah.
And
Eventually, it's anything you do, the money has to
yeah,
be
so the
considered.
financial implications of chronic epilepsy care are considerable, and these group of children should, be looked at by Ministry of Health, for
True.
more appropriate supports, access to medications, etc., access to care.
True.
Some of it may be already happening through some of the specialized centers that are operative in India. So, for instance, children who go to for care in All India Institute of Medical Sciences,
True.
I think get
Or NIMHANS, for
get
exactly.
care relatively
Absolutely.
low cost.
Absolutely.
But those are all there.
It's much better now because the government, like so many aims are there. The government of India is also trying, but it's never ending because you have so
Yeah,
many people going through this
yeah. But
process.
yet, we circle back to those experiences that
It's the
that
same,
in the
yeah,
remote
yeah, I know.
in a remote area, it can be frightening for a family
I
to
agree.
undergo
Yeah,
the social stigma.
true,
So I think we need to progress as a society in terms of educating our younger people, the education policies, and most of all, acceptance of disability is a sign of a society that is maturing, that
true,
is progressing in understanding. And the foundation of good science in education is fundamental to understanding human disability as a part of the overall human experience. And I think that this is where we delve into the area of spirituality,
correct,
compassion,
true,
and caring for
true,
other individuals beyond this financial.
absolutely,
Viewing healthcare as just purely a
true.
transactional
I was just going to
event.
say that.
So I think in the larger scheme of things, one would be desirous of changing attitudes at a fundamental level, improving quality of education that is imparted,
True,
education that is not just rote learning, but education that has practical
true.
implications for all our
Yeah,
lives.
and
Uh,
also make the world a better place.
yeah, and caring for others is an important part of this growing up. What do you call not just the Abraham Maslow's self-realization, but also the idea that you achieve maturity when you are able to take responsibility not just for yourself but for others.
For others. I
And
think
as
that's
a
a very valid
society, that's
our responsibility. I think
yeah.
so. To care
So
for the less privileged, the less lucky, things like this. For example, in school, if you are a child, you have a classmate who has an epileptic fit, you should not, put them in the side. You should participate, see what's going on, make him more inclusive, and that's the way he's, psychologically it'll help him make
right,
a
right.
difference.
There are so many things to talk
Yes.
about, Sharan. I think we've
Yeah.
we've gone through a yatra, a
I
journey
know, I know. I mean, it's
through
fascinating, Prasad,
the
how you have taken through the roller coaster journey.
yeah,
And the way the epilepsy also waxes and wanes,
yeah,
you've had your waxing and waning in this whole
yeah.
process. But
Yeah,
thank you very
I'd love
much. I
to
think
be happy to talk about these and other
we
neurological
will. I
condition at
think for
another
sure
time.
we'll have to catch up on more chats and,
But I hope
as
that
we.
at least the audience here will have glimpsed some of the challenges that face parents who care for children
Yes,
with
yes.
epilepsy.
I think,
So
and
I'd like to sort of end by
sure.
making a few
Please,
observations
please.
and
I was just going to ask you any take home suggestions, messages.
right. So I think the first thing is recognize that epilepsy is a complex condition. Recognize that everything that shakes is not epilepsy. So
Correct.
your child may not have had a real epileptic seizure. Recognize that the right diagnosis, making the right diagnosis and early, is critical to
Yes.
determining treatment response. Finding the right physician with the right kind of training background and access to diagnostic tools is equally important. Accepting the diagnosis of epilepsy and trying to ensure that the child is well supported and is not bullied at school or so involves engagement with schools, with teachers,
Teachers. Yeah.
and then recognizing that all epilepsy may not be curable, but that it may be eminently treatable, and finding the right combination of treatments for a child who has treatment resistant epilepsy, recognizing if there is a potential for surgical treatment and following through on that may be critical in improving overall outcomes. And finally, um, families need to come together to support each other. Relatives may play a very important role in supporting the family, maybe providing a little bit of care for the child, giving parents a little bit of time off to have focus on their own personal lives and so on. And then of course it's the responsibility of society as a whole, particularly the pharmaceutical industry, to create avenues for more
Yes, I think that's
compassionate care, governments to look at access to anti-seizure medications on a cost-effective
correct.
basis. So those are all things that can be done and are done in Western countries where
Lots of it is being done here
here
also.
also.
Yeah, yeah, lots of things are being
So
done here.
so I think that those are all. I'm just maybe repeating a lot of the things that are accessible to people here, but I think that that's the critical part. And overall, I think keeping hope alive, that this is
Yes,
a
I think.
journey, and
Yes,
and actually sometimes the outcomes may not be as bad as you may
yes,
have
yes,
imagined
yes.
at the outset. That things do really turn around
True.
and
I agree.
over time.
I agree.
So time is a big healer.
I agree. Thank you so much, Prasad. I'm telling you, I think it is invaluable to, to make the parents understand,
Right.
more important than the patient himself, because the child is very small,
Right.
and then to also understand how to manage this whole thing. So
Well,
it's
it's been a journey for me sitting here looking at back at my own life
correct.
and how I moved over so many years to be able to reflect on what I've learned
And
in
your
this
yatra
process.
covered all of this, from preconception, which is genetics, to the delivery, which is the childbirth, to beyond, and how this is a continuum of care. It's not all of them in segments and things like that. I think
Well,
that's
I do hope that this will be an informative.
yes, it is. The idea is to create the awareness and education, and then
Right,
they can then seek the right help from the right people.
right, people.
So, our global viewers, as we wind up this whole thing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, press the bell icon, share this video with as many people as you can, because you understand information is very, very important at in this age and era. And more importantly, we have Rebooting the Brain book, we have Rebooting the Brain documentary. Please get access to that. There's so much a wealth of information that we want to give in the field of neuroscience, and it's for you people to lap it up and see who in your family, on your circles, that you can help to make this happen. So that's all from us. Signing off from now. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Okay, Prasad, last but not the least, there is a formality in this thing of giving a book to all our guests who come in. This is the book written by me and Dr. Pratibha called Rebooting the Brain.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, you've heard about
Yes,
this for
I'm
sure.
Truly honored to
Yes,
receive
yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for
Yeah, my pleasure, and we'd love to hear your feedback.
Yes,
Yes.
it's really titled so well, Rebooting the Brain,
Yes.
which is really hope for the future.
Absolutely. And see, I thought we should use the tech language, because even the layman understands tech language.
Yes.
If you use this complicated neuroscience terms, nobody understands. It's too intimidating. It looks too hopeless.
Yeah.
So I thought we can create a more lighter way of communicating the disaster stuff.
This is obviously a phenomenal effort on your
Yes,
part.
thank you so much.
And I wish you all the very best.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you so
I think
much.
it's a fantastic effort.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All the
Thank
best.
you. Thank you.
And on the communication side, I think since we were at that topic, I wanted to say that the education system for a doctor and also the mindset of young doctors are designed to not have good communications. Like if you look at
say that?
the exams are MCQs, they're entrance exams. They're not based on there's no way of measuring aptitude at all. There is whether somebody's interested in the field. If you ask majority of the students that I have spoken to, they say that it is my dream to become a doctor. I'm like, why? Because my parents wanted me to become a doctor, because my society wants me to become a doctor. Which field? I want to go into this field because you make most money in it, because there is survival. So many people look at our education as an initial effort for perpetual lifetime relax gain. The work starts there, but they're not in the mindset to work. And our entrance exams are completely non-communicative. It is using a different skill set of memory, ability to recollect it during stress and do that. Then when they go in, they're preparing for post-graduation. So they spend so much more time with books than with patients. And communication is something that builds with either looking at how your seniors are communicating with patients and how you get exposure to talk to patients. You put if you send a student, an intern to the room saying that this mother has lost a child, now you communicate this news and the doctor has gone, then that intern will realize, oh, I am in this situation and I need to tell this. And everyone will try a few ways and then learn along the way, right? Or you have to tell that this complication has happened after the surgery. Now you tell this to the patient. Or they see a senior doctor, how they are telling it. How are they layering that information?
What is this mental health problem?
No, I'm not trying to, as a disclaimer, trying to, mock at mental health conditions. My father's a psychiatrist, wife is a psychiatrist. I grew up in a mental hospital at Nimhans. I totally understand the severity and seriousness of mental health.
Of course, both of us understand. I'm also a neuroscience guy. We understand.
But the thing is that there is FOMO on some mental health conditions also. Like earlier, people would not be comfortable saying they have a mental health disease.
Correct.
Now, one big leap.
If I refer to a psychiatrist, they get upset with you.
They will start giving us diagnosis of mental health conditions, saying that why are you sending us to a mental health professional? But today, because of one positive leap is that now talking about mental health has become a lot more acceptable.
Thanks to some of the celebrities.
Celebrities who are doing it, and the therapy trend, which is again used to be a more Western acceptable trend, has now come into India. And now people feel FOMO that, oh, my friend has a therapist, I don't have a therapist. Meri therapy kyun nahi ho rahi? Haan? They go to therapists and they say also, no, my therapist told that I should do this, my therapist told I should do this. And they're like, mera therapist kyun nahi hai? So, and then so they have
Like a
FOMO of-
personal trainer, they're looking for a personal therapist.
No, I mean it's just that I would say that there are certain conditions, mental health conditions. It's a good thing that now people are willing to talk about and openly get treated for. But at the same time, because now they recognize certain mental health conditions, they also misinterpret it. Now somebody who's felt sad for 2 days, say I am a depression mein chala gaya. And depression is a very big clinical word where you for at least 2 weeks in a row you have low mood, worthlessness, helplessness, all the entire clinical spectrum is there. But they would throw the word, depression. And so when there is mental health acceptability, there is also a lot of misinformation out there. And that misinformation also feeds off on views and things like that. So people say, you can get out of depression by doing this, or your OCD will be cured like this, or people throw bipolar affective disorder also very easily now. I'm one day if I'm happy, I'm bipolar. So because of all of that, I think there are a lot of mental health issues now just surfacing in terms of volumes, because people have more awareness, and also because of people have misinformation around it. A lot of misconceived perception is there amongst the younger medicos.
Correct.
The problem is they don't have access to people who are 8 to 10 years into the field to give them advice. Correct. Because they don't attend conferences. One of the things I keep advising youngsters is attend conferences.
Yes, and talk to people like us.
That is the only place you are going to find, let's say, a speaker. You talk to them, network with them, go to the exhibition stall, see what technologies are there. Maybe something will help you. True. And you may also find fellowships, you may also find courses.
And some group of people are talking, go into that, listen to what they're saying.
Pre-workshops are there, all of these things
I
are there.
with you.
But whom they talk to is at the that tea shop after their hostel, where they're talking to their second year PG or SR, saying that who's frustrated about his experience.
Correct. And then
koi career nahi hai, sab saturated hai, you go abroad.
Go abroad. वो तो पूरा अच्छा है.
बहुत लाखों करोड़ों में you will pay insurance, you will pay car insurance, life insurance, every mortgage you will pay, spend a lot of money. Cheap things are only cheesy food. Then you will develop cardiac problems, and you will wait for 6 months for your doctor, and you will come back to India for treatment. Basically, that is the cycle, right? On the expense, I went for the postdoc fellowship in Stanford, and it's in Palo Alto, and the rent around Stanford University for a house this big, studio which has a toilet, $1,200 in 2011.
Whoa.
So we used our Indian dimag, we went to Craigslist and we saw, in Palo Alto on the other side, it is for $450. We're like, all of us went and uprooted ourselves there, heard 4 gunshots and came back. And our faculty freaked out. They're like, don't ever go to East Palo Alto. No, it's not worth your life. Don't do that. We are paying you enough to stay here. I'm like, but sir, we want to save and go home and splurge there. Now saving is whatever you're earning, just use it here. Get a car, get this house over here, take the bus that comes from Stanford. Don't go to East Palo Alto. You're going to come back in an ambulance. That's what they were saying.